you want to go into the legal profession. You've noticed that in order to get into the legal profession, to get to the further stages, you need a 2-1, and solicitors generally now are not offering jobs to people who've got less than a 2-1. So you want the highest marks. Perhaps you're disappointed with the mark that you got for this first TMA. Well, the first thing I'd say to you, don't worry about it. The mark throughout this law degree will be averaged with different weightings towards that final degree. But what I want to address in this TMA is what you need to do to make sure you get those marks that you want. Now, I recall having a discussion, it was a relatively heated discussion, with a student who was very upset with the mark that I'd given him. He'd passed, but he wanted the top mark, and was outraged that I hadn't given it to him. And I had explained to him that, first of all, I am governed by the marking bands in the book, and we are required, in effect, as markers, to be auditors. We have to see that the evidence is there and be able to justify the mark that we've got from the evidence of what you'd written. And this particular student had actually done quite a good piece of work. He'd looked at the manual, he'd summarised the facts and the main arguments, and had given me a very good summary in his own words. It wasn't that he'd cut and pasted stuff. He'd read it, he'd seen what the main points, and he'd reproduced this in the essay. He'd even explained some of the key definitions and mentioned the facts of some of the relevant cases. But that's not what we're expecting for the highest grades. It was certainly enough to get this chap a pass, but what it wasn't enough was to get those grades that would have got him into the legal profession. I mean, he took on board what I said, and his grades went up to those top grades. But what you need to keep in mind, what you would expect when you consult a lawyer. You want a lawyer not just to be able to describe the current law. You want them to see the relationships between different areas of law and different rules and different ideas, and to be able to see the relationship between different cases, because should your case be going all the way to the Supreme Court, you're going to be arguing as to which case applies. And those kind of skills, to be able to differentiate, are important for lawyers. We're looking for a lawyer who can evaluate the arguments, recognise and discuss the strengths, the weaknesses, the limits, sometimes the qualifications on a particular rule. And most of all, we want lawyers who can solve problems. So description will get you a pass, but it's not going to get you any further. So how do you develop those skills and evidence them in your TMAs? Well, the key here is to think of the balance between these different skills. Description, important in certain circumstances. Explanation, a step higher, involves more thinking about the issue, not only just describing it, but actually explaining it to somebody else. Outlining arguments is important, but to go higher, you need to do the analysis of arguments and most of all the critical evaluation. So how do you do this? Well, you can review your planning and your written essay and see, have I got the balance right? Is this a descriptive essay, or is it an essay that tackles some of the issues, that critically evaluates some of the assertions that have been made by academic writers or even judges themselves? Because as you've seen, later courts may decide that earlier decisions were wrongly decided and move the law forward. So review your planning and your written essay to ensure that, but actually the level of your thinking will show through anyway. because what you write, it will reflect your engagement with the subject. Now, the student that I spoke of earlier had picked up the information and he'd processed it enough to be able to describe and explain. But he wasn't really engaging with the subject in asking, well, is this argument valid in every circumstance? Is it valid only in certain circumstances? What are the strengths and the weaknesses to that argument? On problem questions, lecturers often, examiners talk about the all I know about a subject answer, where usually in a problem question the person has set out all the key principles and described them, and almost as an afterthought in the last one or two paragraphs applied, or an attempt to apply very quickly, those to the problem. We're looking for solving problems, and so it's those skills of argument, of critical evaluations, seeing the strengths and the weaknesses in the arguments and coming to a reasoned conclusion that need to be shown. So how do you get this engagement? Well, reading is certainly the first step, but you do need to think about it. And students who've thought about it, that thinking comes through. If they've thought about where does this fit into all the other rules, how does this conflict, the argument that's been put forward by Dicey or whoever, and that thinking about it. Reading law reports is a really good way of doing this, because English law reports aren't like some continental ones, which are beautifully crafted, logical statements from A through to Z being the conclusion. They're very often the judges thinking out loud. As they deal with a problem, they think, well, this needs to be taken into account, that needs to be taken into account, this would have this set of conclusions, and so on. And the contrast when you're reading an essay where somebody merely cites a case to back up an assertion of a rule, and somebody who can say, well, this was the thinking behind the rule, these are the strengths and the weaknesses, these are the circumstances in which it's not going to apply, they're the ones that are going to get the highest marks. So shift the balance from description up through explanation, up through analysis, and up to critical evaluation, because that's where the marks are. Remember what I said at the beginning. The lawyers now, to get on in the profession, need to get at least a 2-1. The highest marks, the two bands that we give essays will fall into that. But when we give someone a mark, it's because we have the evidence there on the paper that they have and are able to do the critical evaluation which your future employer wants. So those are the things you need to do, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on that. So email me, but I will keep stressing this. Description is fine to get you a pass, but if you want more, then you've got to engage with the subject, you've got to think about it, you've got to come to conclusions. Okay, thank you.